But yeah, it's a tough thing. Wow. But a lot of good things about him too.
Well, I know that you wrote this Game of Thorns book, which is fascinating. So I know you're not a big Clinton fan. So any comments on the Clinton presidency or even Hillary, which obviously this is a big part of this book is about. Any comments about that? Any thoughts about Hillary Clinton's? It sure seemed like she was going to win. I mean, that was a slam dunk, right? And then it didn't happen.
Yeah. In fact, I had a contract the night of the election. I lost my contract. I had a contract to write a book called First Man, Bill Clinton in Hillary's White House. I had already written the outline for 16 chapters, submitted it to a publisher, received an advance, six-figure advance, and was going to write that book. And then Donald Trump won the election. My agent called me up and said, you're going to have to return your advance because it's in your contract. Hillary had to win the election. So I took a walk with my daughter. I said, this is my income for a year. I'm cooked. And I called my agent back and I said, do you think there's a chance I could turn this into a book about the election? She said, well, I've never heard of anybody doing that, taking a contract they got on a book and turning it into a different book, but you can try. So I called my editor and I said, look, I've written 4 chapters of this book. They're all about Hillary because the book's going to be about Bill Clinton in Hillary's White House, but I could adapt it to a book about the election. And is there a chance? She said, well, I've never heard of that before, but I'm having dinner tonight with the president of the publishing company. You get me a title and you get me 500 words. We'll see what he says. So I got them a title, Game of Thorns, and I got them 500 words. And they said, okay, we'll keep your contract. You can write a book about the election.
Wow. Good pivot on that one, Doug. That was
Oh, it was close. That was close.
See, I never thought you were a big fan of the Clintons. I always had a feeling that you were not, I know that you're a writer and you're a historian, I think, the way, right? And so I know you can probably be neutral, but I never felt like you liked the Clintons that much. You were a big fan.
Well, I'm a big fan of all of them. I admire them for getting in there, and I try to keep my criticism non-personal. And I was upset with the Clinton Foundation because money given to the Clinton Foundation did have ramifications. There was a billionaire from Nigeria that gave $1 million to the Clinton Foundation, who owned big hotels, and the Boko Haram of Nigeria were never declared as terrorists because it would have hurt tourism in Nigeria. And the President Obama wanted it, and Secretary of State Kerry wanted it, or called for it, and they had threatened the ambassador to Nigeria, the American ambassador, and Kerry followed Hillary as Secretary of State. But she wouldn't do it, and I wondered if that $1 million donation made a difference. I know when Trump became president, Boeing came in and said, okay, where's our $14 billion to build the new Air Force One, or whatever it was. I can't remember the exact amount. And Trump said, wait a minute. You gave $1 million to the Clinton Foundation. All of your top executives maxed out their highest donations to Clinton running for president. And you want $14 billion from the Trump administration or whatever it is to build the new Air Force One. I'm in no hurry for Air Force One. We're going to have to talk about this. And I can tell you right now, it's going to have to come in under budget, and it's going to have to come in on time, or you're not going to get anything. So that was Trump.
I love it. Wow. It reminds me of that story from the New England Patriots with Tom Brady when they were 18-0 going in the Super Bowl. So they were so confident they were going to beat the Giants, they trademarked 19-0. And then they lost. And when they interviewed one of the guys on the Giants after the game, he said, I guess they should have trademarked 18-1. And I felt that about when Hillary lost. I thought she kind of went into that very confident, thinking it was done.
Yeah.
And a lot of Democratic friends of mine were just very confident. And somehow something told me that the disruptor, the person that was going to pull everybody together that way, that there was not, people were just tired of following career politicians.
Yeah.
I think they still are. I don't know what that bodes for Trump. Probably nothing. But it's fascinating to me that this your book here just basically tells you the whole story of what happens when you try and lead in that style in politics.
Well, it's fascinating. The other lesson I take away from this, Tom and Steve, is to don't underestimate your chances. You know, we tend to write it off. I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do this. And these presidents show you can. I mean, look at Bill Clinton. You got to give him a lot of credit. He had a lot of scandals. Most people that had lived the life of Bill Clinton would never run for president. He just put it out on the table. He ran anyway. And he had to live down a lot of the scandals that came out. But he didn't let it hold him back.
You know, we've always said that possibility projections can lead to impossibility achieving. And after talking to you, it's really reminding me that these guys that run for president just think they can do that. It sounds impossible, but they think they can do it, which is why they do.
Unbelievable.
Amazing, isn't it?
Doug, you've told me so many stories over the years about George W. Bush, who I know has been a good friend of yours for a long time. What's the best story you could tell us that you could actually say in an interview that you could tell us about George W. Bush?
Well, I was sitting with George W. Bush in his office after his dad won the presidency, and we were talking about the inaugural and who would go on the transition committee and who would work in the White House. And as we were sitting there talking about it, he said, "What's going to happen to me?" Well, that was very unusual for him. He was not a self-reflective person. And I was a bit shocked, caught off guard by it. I said, well, I knew what he meant. He didn't mean what's going to happen to me. We knew he was going to run for governor of Texas. We knew he was going to buy the Texas Rangers. He was already on the phone the last month talking to people, chomping on a dry cigar and saying on the phone, you want to buy a baseball team? We're going to buy a baseball team. So he was on his way to do that. So we knew that. But when he said, what's going to happen to me, he was asking, what does it mean to be the son of an American president? How's that going to impact me? I said, well, you want me to do a memo on what happens to children of presidents? He said, yeah, do a memo. So I did a memo, and that eventually led to the book, the New York Times bestseller, All the President's Children. But when I did the memo, it came back, the information came back, and it was horrendous what happens to presidential children. They do great things, but they have terrible things happen to them. And one is it's almost like a curse. If you're named after your father, the president, it's just, John Tyler Jr. dies an alcoholic in his 20s, and William Henry Harrison Jr. dies an alcoholic in his 20s. Calvin Coolidge Jr. dies after a freak accident on the White House tennis courts. And George W. Bush, he's not a junior, but that's what we called him. That's what he wanted for a long time. We called him Junior. George W. Bush. I was listening to car radio, and the story came on the car radio. John F. Kennedy Jr.'s airplane had just disappeared over the Atlantic. I had chills go down my spine. I thought, this is unbelievable. This happens over and over throughout history. What is this? And I really believe it's the pressure of expectations. From the time they're little kids, children come up to them, John F. Kennedy Jr., and they say, when are you going to run for president? Imagine getting that. And it was even worse with him because his dad was murdered. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to do anything about this? What are you going to do? When are you going to be president? Imagine the pressure. And I think that's why these children broke. They broke under the pressure. But George W. Bush, who was an alcoholic for a while, he had some severe problems. He beat it, and he changed, and he became president of the United States. He did not fall into that syndrome. He stopped it just cold. I'm not going to do that. And that's very impressive to me.
How about Ronald Reagan? He's, it's interesting, Doug. I think anyway that, Reagan, and during his time, and there was a lot of controversy, Iran-Contra and all the rest of it. But now he's almost a deity. He's almost, it's all, right time does something. What's your best Ronald Reagan story? I know you get introduced in your speeches, but the Ronald Reagan video, which is really hard to follow too.
Yeah, that's hard to follow, yeah.
Ronald Reagan introduces Doug basically in the speech. So what's your best story on that one, Doug?
Yeah, with Reagan, I mean, he won the Cold War, and that, you can say Lincoln saved the nation. Ronald Reagan saved humanity. I mean, at the time, school teachers in Holland were telling their children, it doesn't matter where you go to college because the world is not going to survive. By the time you're in college, it will be over. They expected the world to end in a nuclear annihilation. So he's pretty hard to beat. He's one of the greatest presidents in history. But what I liked about him was his jokes. He told all these wonderful jokes and about the Soviet Union. Here's one that I find especially funny: good news and bad news. And the teacher, the political teacher, is telling the kids, comrades, there's good news and bad news. And this joke, by the way, Steve and Tom, is a little too close to home right now for comfort. But he says, comrades, there's good news and bad news. The good news is this: someday, even the great United States of America will become a socialist country. The bad news, when that happens, there won't be any place left on earth for us to buy grain. So that's his joke. That was a joke in the Soviet Union. They made fun of the fact that socialism doesn't work. And it's not too funny now that I think about it, because America's on the verge of socialism.
President Reagan was funny. There's a video on YouTube that's 45 minutes long of just all the funny things he said in his talks and all the way throughout his whole presidency. And one of them was really funny, where he said somebody came in his office and slammed his fist on his desk and said, I don't agree with you. And the guy said, well, you can't do that in Russia. And he said, oh, yes, you can. You can go in there and you can slam your fist on a desk and say, I don't like Reagan.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
You can say the same thing.
Yeah.
And he delivered it. He was an actor, and he was a politician, but he was used to delivering his lines, and they were flawless.
Was he a pretty nice guy, Doug, personally?
Very nice guy. And I underscore what Tom just said. He rehearsed that joke that he gives so casually in the debate with Mondale. That was
so great.
Really,
that was good.
The timing,
I will not exploit your youth and inexperience.
Yeah, he had to master that timing, had to discipline himself, not rush ahead, couldn't have any twinkle in his eye to give it away where he was going, had to be absolutely straight before he pulled the trigger. And that was masterful, and he was a great actor. I remember, Steve, now that you mention it, being on the stage with him from time to time, and he would tell this story, this great story, and it was a tearjerker, and he'd end his speech with it, and the audience would be just moved to tears. It was very emotional. So we were in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he was running for president. And I had given my speech. Now he was speaking right after me. So he gets up and he gives his speech. And when he starts to give his speech, in walks the media. So they come in and they set up their scaffolding and they set up their cameras, and there's kind of a break in the action before Reagan comes to the microphone, and they're all lined up, hundreds of them, and big bright lights on. And so here's an audience of 15,000, but 400 of them are the American media, and they're all set to go. So Reagan gives his speech, and he starts towards the end, and I think, wait till this happens, wait till he gives this, because I know everybody's going to be crying. And he gives his speech, and so help me, he pulls his punches. It wasn't as hot as he usually gives it. I thought he didn't do very good. What's the deal? Later, I saw the excerpt on TV, and I realized this is a master. He understands the difference between hot and cold. And if you're speaking from stage, remember, they always thought Julie Andrews wouldn't be a good actress. So they had Audrey Hepburn play My Fair Lady. And they finally said, okay, they let Julie Andrews try on Sound of Music. And she made the transition. But when you're on stage, like Julie Andrews was, you have to belt it. They've got to be able to hear it on the last row, even your stage whisper. It's very different from on camera, where you have to be very subtle and very cool. And otherwise you come off too animated and you scare the audience. And so that's what Reagan was doing. He knew that there were 15,000 people in the hall, but there were 15 million or more who would see excerpts from this on national television. And he couldn't be hot. He couldn't come off as scary. And he had to tone it down. That was the master.
Wow. That's great.
That's good.
Well, Doug, we could ask you questions all day. You are a national treasure, and we really appreciate you coming on the show. I got to tell you one thing I've been wanting to tell you for so long. This is typical Doug Wead. It's right here. It's I was talking to our mutual friend before he died, Rich DeVos, who we both knew for a long time. And I said to Rich, because I had known Rich for a long time over the years, I'd interviewed him. Of course, I know you knew him better than I did even. But I said to him, we were talking about speaking and about Bill Gove and that whole thing, right? And I said, he said, what's your favorite two speeches? I said, I'm glad you asked. I said, Selling America. You remember Selling America, Rich?
Oh,
Rich
yeah.
Okay, greatest speech.
Great.
One of the greatest speeches I ever heard. I said, Selling America is my favorite. And I said, do you still have that on tape, Rich, or on any kind of recording? He goes, I haven't seen that since the 60s. And he said, what's your second one? I said, my second favorite one is Doug Wead, David and Goliath, which he spoke on your stage way back. And I think it's the 70s you gave that speech. And I had that tape forever, and I wore both of those tapes out. And Rich said, I have a copy of that tape. I always wanted to tell you that. He goes, no, I've got Doug on tape. Yeah, I still have that cassette. He said, I don't have Selling America, but I got David and Goliath. And I wanted to tell you that for a lot of years, especially since Rich has passed away. He was a good guy, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, and you've had a tremendous career, Steve. It's you're really
thanks.
an icon to all of us who've been in speaking over the years.
Well, thanks, Doug. I appreciate it. It's always such an honor to be on stage with you. Nobody can follow you, but it's been a lot of fun trying. Definitely. We really appreciate you taking time, Doug. We know you're busy, and congratulations on all the success. Doug, if someone wants to follow you, because I know that the Trump book is controversial to people because it's so polarized, as you know better than anyone. But maybe they're Trump fans. We have Trump fans, of course. We have non-Trump fans. But even for the people that are not Trump fans, which books would you recommend them starting out with to follow you? And where can we find these books to follow you?
Yeah, well, you go to DougWead.com, which is DougWead.com. And if they love history, they would love The Raising of a President, because it's the only book ever written about the mothers and fathers of all the American presidents. It's a remarkable book and a remarkable study of how these presidents were raised. There have been books on the mothers, books on the fathers, but not the triad together. And then All the President's Children is just fascinating. It doesn't. It's I wrote that before Trump's presidency, but it is just interesting and fascinating.
Yeah, your books are phenomenal, Doug. You're an amazing writer. I read your stuff and I look at my stuff and I go, oh boy, I need to get better. I need to improve. Again, thanks so much, Doug. We really appreciate you coming. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, Steve and Tom.